Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. So if you've been following Healing the Spirit for some time, you may know that usually on Mondays I share weekly contemplations, which are really these episodes where I talk about the astrology of the coming week as well as the energetics associated with that astrology. And this week, I decided to do something a little different. I decided to break a little out of tradition because on March 7, 2023, which is on Tuesday, Saturn will begin her transit in Pisces for roughly the next 3 years. And why is this significant? The reason for that is because since 2017, Saturn has been in Capricorn and then Aquarius, both of which are signs that Saturn traditionally rules. So this move of Saturn going into Pisces is going to be the first time since 2017 that Saturn is in a sign that it doesn't rule, right? So to celebrate this milestone and to kind of pay homage to this pretty significant transit that we're currently moving into, I decided to invite two of the most brilliant and inspiring astrologers that I know in my community, Erin, Tack, Shipley, and Sabrina Monarch. And both of them have been on the podcast before. You can listen to my conversations with each of them individually. And both of them have pretty serious Pisces credentials, which they talk about in the episode. And so I really love recording this with them. It kind of felt like the three of us created this energetic bubble, and then we kind of just went into channeling mode. Like we were just kind of channeling this communal wisdom from the three of us. And it's quite a substantive episode. It ran over 90 minutes, the conversation. And of course, right? I mean, this is Saturn we're talking about, the grandmother of time. She does not like to be rushed, right? And also, Pisces, speaks to mutable water, right? Speaks to the ocean. There's a certain depth that I think Pisces evokes. And so we covered a lot of different topics in this conversation, and the transition from one topic to the next felt very flowing and smooth and just really like a dance. And it was beautiful to be in that space. And I am so excited for you to listen to it. We spoke about dreams and translating our dreams into reality, this idea of maturity and the maturation of our dreams. We spoke about the different things that we can think about that embodies Saturn and Pisces, namely ice cream and diamonds. We spoke about the necessity of daydreaming and the utility of leisure. We spoke about judgment and jealousy, spiritual lineages, all kinds of different topics related to this amazing archetype. Honestly, I'm really excited for this transit. So, I'll let you get into it because I want you to enjoy both of their perspectives, and they introduce themselves during the conversation. So here is my conversation with Sabrina Monarch and Erin Tack Shipley on Saturn in Pisces. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Sabrina and Erin. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, Jonathan.
This is so exciting.
I know.
I love our Mercury and Pisces trio.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love this. I had a dream that the three of us were recording something, And then I thought about Saturn and Pisces upon waking up, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take that as an omen. So here we are. Both of you have been on the podcast before, but maybe before we dive deep into it, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to everyone listening, and yeah, just maybe tell us a little bit about who you are as a human being and also as an astrologer, and anything else that you want to share with us. And yeah, I think that's a good place to start. I was also going to say, feel free to throw in or pepper in your Pisces credentials, but I'll leave it up to you to talk about it or not.
I'll let the Aries go first.
Okay. I'm Sabrina Monarch. I started out, I feel like I've always been a writer and a dreamer. I'm a Pisces rising, and I have Mercury, Mars, and Venus in Pisces also. And I have like a mystical relationship to life and to astrology. Some years back, I had like a awakening experience where I started to see these little sparks of light that validate resonance, and they've been my companions and guides for a while now. And then as far as astrology, I practice evolutionary astrology and have been teaching that since 2018. I have Magic of the Spheres podcast, which both of you have been on. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks, Sabrina. So good to be here with you. I'm Erin, also known as E.T. Shipley. I am a professional consulting astrologer. I'm also a writer and some days an artist. My Sun and Mercury are in Pisces, and my ascendant is in Capricorn. And I primarily work with traditional and Hellenistic techniques. So I use traditional rulers, and according to the systems that I work with, Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces. I also have a Sagittarius moon, which is Jupiter's other sign of rulership, and my Saturn and Jupiter are in a exact partile opposition. So I'm really excited about Saturn in Pisces because it feels just very aligned with some of my personal placements. And primarily the work that I do is about helping folks navigate the impacts of collapse, which is, as I understand it, the result of mass corporate convergences that have created dilemmas as opposed to problems in our world. And dilemmas do not have solutions. They only have ways of coping or pathways of diverging from said dilemmas. So I work with a lot of folks who experience, just the impacts of collapse generally from a place of marginalization or neglect, or as one of my teachers, Carmen Spagnola, says, abandonment is the gap between what you need and what you get. And I really love that definition. And I mostly work with folks who are experiencing abandonment on a physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual level, and try to help bridge that gap a little bit.
Thank you, Erin. I love that description of your work. So I got the three of us here together today to talk about Saturn in Pisces, which is a transit that we're going to be experiencing starting March 7, 2023. And essentially, we'll be experiencing this more or less until February 13, 2026, if my dates serve me correctly. We have this period of kind of dipping into Aries sometime in like May to September 2025. But for the most part, this chunk of almost 3 years is going to be Saturn in Pisces. And I think this is quite interesting for a few different reasons, but probably the one that's coming up for me at the moment is the fact that Saturn since 2017 has been in Capricorn and then in Aquarius, both Saturn ruled signs, and then now Saturn is entering Pisces. And so, we might be expecting a slightly different flavor. And, I have been the beneficiary of both your geniuses, and I've been studying from you, Sabrina, and I've been working with you, Erin, one-on-one. And I think I even knew I think I knew about your work from Sabrina, Erin. I might be wrong about that, but I think
possible.
we kind of like found each other through this weaving. And so, and I thought that I'd have both of you on to talk a little bit about like this temperature shift, and kind of what you both have been feeling into, thinking about, and noticing in your own field around this upcoming transit. So I thought maybe a good place to start for us would be talking first about the Saturn in Pisces archetype. And curious to hear for you, Sabrina, what's coming up around thinking about Saturn in Pisces.
Yeah, first want to just say this is all mutual appreciation all around. I'm so delighted to be here with both of you. So with Saturn in Pisces, I'm thinking about Saturn as like an auditor of the sign or house that it's going through, bringing pressure, bringing obstacle. And because I have a Piscean experience in this lifetime, it just has me reflecting on some of the things that I've worked with around being a dreamer. Like first, being in my early 20s and dreaming up my life. And by and large, also now currently living out a lot of what I've dreamt and being in this place of not being sure what my next dream is, which is interesting in its own way. But I think about like the maturity or the maturation of the dream and of the hardship of disillusionment processes, and I think too, do we have obstacles in the first place to dreaming? Like, are we blocked off to envisioning something else? Because it is vulnerable in some sense to dream, like being in that space where we're simultaneously in this reality and also holding another reality is a place where people can go too far. They can become escapists or, not actualize that other reality. And there's a grief, like a real grief of having too deep a split between our life and our dream life. It might be tender to want the things that we want, so we don't even let ourselves go there. And then when we do say yes to it, when we're actually committed to the thing that we're dreaming, it's going to require parts of us to develop or evolve. We're going to have to confront parts of ourselves. So it has me thinking about looking at dreaming not as some kind of like wispy, cloudy pastime, but as something like that has a lot of weight and gravity to it when we put Saturn in Pisces.
I love that, Sabrina. This is making me think about, when I was first tuning into Saturn in Pisces and just kind of feeling into what's coming up for me in my body and in my mind, the first phrase that came up for me was spiritual discipline. And then I started going down into like what discipline means, and I think a lot of us have pretty negative connotation of the word discipline. Like discipline feels like it has this energy of like chastising, but I like thinking about discipline as related to the word disciple. And, the word disciple kind of has this etymology of like being one who follows another for the purpose of learning. And so, as you were speaking, it's kind of making me think about, first of all, like this idea of reality, right? And the superimposition of different realities that are always happening in our, reality TM, right? Like the one consensus reality that we're experiencing. And there's, I think with Saturn in Pisces, maybe an invitation to also start questioning like whose reality reigns supreme in a particular reality that we're kind of finding ourselves in, and if maybe there's a chance here to kind of toggle back and forth between the different layers of reality that may bring forth more regenerative possibilities. Yeah. What about you, Erin? What's coming up for you?
So many things. I love hearing about the disciple because I think we talked about that in one of our sessions and like riffed on it for a really long time. Yeah, some of the things that Sabrina is talking about in terms of like maturing the dream and making the dream a reality, and also not getting caught up or escaping into the dream, reminds me of the starving artist archetype. And Saturn being a planet, especially in more Vedic traditions, that is like usually depicted as very like frail and very thin. And I think we can look at Saturn in that sense as like the guru that is surviving only off of spirit. But if we take this starving artist archetype, I'm sort of thinking about Saturn in Pisces as someone who is having to reckon with not actually being able to starve themselves and continue to materialize the dream or make the work that they need to work, that they want to make. And so Saturn in Pisces really feels like reckoning with the ways that we need to nourish the structures, the like, yeah, I'm thinking about like the digestive system for whatever reason, and like our internal organs and all of the things that actually support our body, as connected to Saturn as like a planet of necessity. And so Saturn is bringing the necessities to the dream, or the necessities to the dream realm, in order to make those dreams a reality. I'm thinking a lot actually about like a close family member who is an artist who has been like struggling with finances and struggling with charging enough for their work, and the ways that they're going to be in a Saturn return with Saturn in Pisces. And so I'm hoping that all of the starving artists out there get an opportunity to, yeah, just have a more nutritive experience of the world, especially in terms of Jupiter being associated with like fats. And there was something that I was thinking about this morning. Oh, Saturn being associated with cold, and like the qualities of Saturn in ancient astrology are cold and dry, and Jupiter is warm and moist. And Jupiter, or Pisces being a water sign rather, I was thinking about Saturn in Pisces as ice cream, where we have like the coldness of Saturn and then the like extreme like fat of Jupiter. And so there is like a huge amount of sweetness that can come through with this transit, but we have to like open ourselves to receiving it. I think I'll stop there. I have more to add, but that's what's coming up right now.
I see you smiling, Sabrina. I feel like there was something there.
I'm just smiling because like I'm living in Peru right now, and there's like this vegan ice cream sign that I saw last night that I got so excited about, because like vegan ice cream isn't easy to come by here. Like I don't always know where to find it. And so last night I saw it as just this like sign that was lighting up, and that's what I'm doing after this podcast, basically. So I'm just laughing to myself that like ice cream as a symbol. And I also think it's really sweet to think about that combination of cold and fat, and coming up with an image like that. Like it's very heartening for the transit.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to talk about Saturn transits where we're talking about the depression and the sadness and the misery that Saturn brings, and the work and the labor and all of that. And all of that's true, but I think there are also definitely powerful positive significations, as there always will be when you bring a malefic and a benefic into context together.
Yeah, it's also kind of making me think about there was a word that you were saying there, Erin, about the necessity of dreaming. And it's also, I'm kind of exploring it in a slightly different light around thinking even of sleeping, right, as the vessel that helps us to dream, or that brings us to that dream state or that dream realm, and the importance of getting enough sleep, and like what processes are, Saturn in Pisces is also making me think about like the processes that we don't necessarily think about, that are maybe more on an unconscious or subconscious level, that nonetheless are really important to our survival and to our being able to then enjoy the things that we want to enjoy, right? Mm-hmm.
That reminds me, there's this scholarship by Robert Bella about him. He wrote this book, Religion and Human Evolution, but he defines at the very beginning what normal reality is, or what normal life is. And it's very dry, the way he describes it. It's a series of mechanical movements moved toward an objective, aka work, to ensure survival. And it's based on fundamental anxiety, ultimately of death. That's normal life, as he describes it. Versus, he says it's literally unbearable to be there all of the time. And so as humans, we dream, we sleep, we get into trance when we are watching a film or at the theater, or we're playing a game. And so we're constantly moving into other realities, which are more nutritive, whether or not we're even doing it on purpose, because it can also be the act of daydreaming. And Saturn in Pisces has me thinking about the intentional harnessing, if you will, of those states, like actually taking them seriously. Some people have like the programming kind of thick around like, I can't do nothing, I have to be productive. But having like time that is just devoted to trance or experimentation or relaxation or leisure could actually be like a real nutrient for our dream lives.
Yeah.
Can I jump in? Because this is like making me think about the first archetype that I thought of as I was meditating on Saturn and Pisces. Have either of you ever done a sensory deprivation float?
Yeah.
So basically, when I first heard about it, I had so much anxiety. I was like, I will never do that. That sounds horrifying. I was remembering this movie that I saw as a kid. I think it might have actually been Fairy Tale, about these two girls who are gifted cameras and they go around like photographing. But in the movie, I need to check and make sure that that's the film that I'm thinking of. In the movie, there's a guy who's like, he's like Houdini, or he's a magician, and he dunks somebody. Like one of his tricks is he dips somebody in a tank and they're like floating in there and like, like full body underwater and they can't breathe. And that's what I thought of when I heard sensory deprivation. This is not that. So I just really need to clarify for anyone. But I do, for anyone who's listening, who's getting anxiety thinking about it. But I do also feel like some people have the experience of like claustrophobia or anxiety at the pressure of being in an enclosed space. But this particular type of enclosed space is it's usually an all white tank, and you walk in for your float, and it's they have like soft lighting, like usually like pinks or blues or purples, and the water in the tank is really shallow. It's only like maybe 2 or 3 feet deep, and you step into the tank. And you close the door, and they have like pillows that can help you float if you want, but there's salt in the water, so that your body floats. And at time, all of the lights go off, and you're closed in this tank. The music goes off, and you're just floating there in space for as long as you've booked it for. And it is so deeply relaxing. The water's like slightly warm. It's made to be, I think, like about body temperature, maybe a touch warmer than body temperature, so that you don't ever get cold. and it's a really meditative space, but I'm thinking about like the pressure around the body that this salt creates, and this enclosed experience, this container, Saturn, with water, Jupiter, or Pisces rather, that creates or like facilitates this experience of deep rest. And Cameron Allen talks about Saturn as like depression, but also like deep rest as a antidote to depression. And this really feels like that in terms of, in connection to what Sabrina was talking about, like with people feeling like they can't do nothing. But this is like the epitome of doing nothing and like feeling nothing. And being in nothingness that can actually become like a channel or a portal to another world or to this other meditative space. And that feels very Saturn in Pisces to me.
Yeah, it's also making me think about this book that I recently read. I think the author's name is Johann Hari. It's called Stolen Focus, Why We Can't... let me see, why you can't pay attention and how to think. Let me see. What is the exact title here? I'm getting a little Saturnian here. I want to make sure I get this right. It's called Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And one of the things that he was talking about in this book was about how we live in a culture that really prizes the ability to focus, but doesn't look at the other side of focus as being important, which is to let the mind wander, right? And there was a study done essentially around how without giving the mind space to wander aimlessly, our ability to focus is actually it takes away from our ability to focus, right? Because we like to think of focusing and mind wandering as a binary when actually they're two sides of the same coin, and that the deficit of one will also result in the deficit of others. So it's interesting to think about that. And then something I will add too is I was in a class recently where one of my classmates was sleep deprived the night before, and then we went into the trance states using our breath and using our voice. And then afterwards, it was so funny because her reaction was that like, I don't need to sleep anymore. Like, I feel so refreshed. I am more refreshed than I've ever been. So yeah, it's kind of making me think about reclaiming the importance of doing nothing and kind of this more internal or passive way of being that a lot of us have been trained out of in our culture.
That has me thinking of, like, we're talking about focus and non-focus, but what if we swap that as well for like reality and out in another realm? Right. So like when we're doing real life things, when we're like taking care of basic tasks of living, or we're working, or we're doing something practical, versus when we're out in space a little bit more, and kind of like the quality of like actually really bridging those realms in a real way. And that I think there's really an art in Pisces, and thinking about Saturn and Pisces too, of like being able to bridge that, to have like our dream life, but also understand the mechanics or systems or natural laws, etc., to apply those things, and so to kind of bring them into focus or bring them into reality. But when we think about like, real life and what's real, there's almost like a gripping in the same way as focus if we never also take a break from it.
Yeah.
It's very much like the image that I'm getting is like a big ship in water, of like the archetype of adventure and travel that Jupiter and is associated with as like a ruler of Pisces, and also Pisces is like otherworldly or other realms, but then Saturn being the structure that navigates that, or is navigating that space, and choosing the adventure as real life as opposed to being separated from it. I think also there is something about endurance here. So there's like almost like rowers and like a regatta. This the effort that goes in, and when we're talking about Saturn, I'm often thinking about systems. So one of the things that I love about like the rowing metaphor or the regatta metaphor is like a team of rowers, of people who are working together to get somewhere. And I think there is like a social community oriented aspect to Saturn that often gets forgotten, usually to serve a purpose or to serve a set of laws or rules or, yeah, it feels more functional than goal oriented. But maybe the function is to serve the dream or serve the adventure.
Yeah, it's kind of making me think about this idea of collective dreaming also a little bit, Erin, and this idea of, the other day, my mom, who has her Saturn in Pisces natally, in her on her midheaven, was asking me this really interesting question of like, but what is the dream? Like, what is the dream realm? Like, is it part of our psyche working through materials that we are picking up on in daily life, right, during our waking moments? Or is the dream realm this other being, this other dimension that we can tap into? And I'm not really sure if there's an answer there, but I do think that what you're saying, Erin, is kind of making me think about how reality too, right, is in some sense collective dreaming, that we create like this dimension based on the dreams of whoever came before us. And we are currently, whether we like it or not, conscious or subconscious, is creating a reality for the people who come after us, right? So thinking about Saturn as connected to the durability of things and longevity, things that we pass down to other people after we pass, right? After our physical incarnation pass. It's like, what are we weaving into, what are we coding into this realm of reality? I was also wanting to respond to something that you were talking about, Sabrina, because this is making me think about this idea of Saturn as reality and then Jupiter as participation. That something about Saturn and Pisces is also making me contemplate where in our reality, right? And I'm putting air quotes here, we are kind of relegating our power or our creative agency in order to relinquish, or maybe not in order to relinquish, but due to fear of participation. Because I think there's something about like participating in our reality that is extremely scary when we have been, I don't know, like when we have been marginalized or when we've been traumatized in one way or another. That act of participation feels like the biggest threat, when actually maybe what we really want is to participate, right? And in what ways are we kind of getting stuck in this distorted idea of like who gets to say what reality is? I'm
lit up by that, because I think a lot about, say, the context of people that are seeking to be entrepreneurial or create a business. And one of the major obstacles or hurdles is then that you have to be seen, that you have to invite people into your work, that you have to market, you have to take up space. And those things cause fear for people. And I think about with Saturn, authority, and how when delivering a idea or presenting yourself, just at like a psychological, social level, like having some degree of inner confidence or authority in one's presentation often can result in the other or the audience being like, oh, okay, like checks out, as opposed to when the delivery comes with hesitation or insecurity. And something that I find just basically enchanting about like having a brand or having a business is that you invent it, you put it out into the world, and as soon as you hear people talking about it as though it's like a thing, like it exists, you see that you took some part in creating culture, creating something in reality. And like my own imperfections, like I have issues, I have insecurities, literally everyone else does too. But there's like an inner sensor. Oftentimes, not only that, but to be able to just get on the stage or be in the arena and share is like removing that first personal hurdle of like, do I have the right to take up space? I think the world tends to participate. Like it's that personal sensor that has a lot of power in this too.
Yeah. I think one of the things that comes to me too when I'm hearing about Saturn and authority is that the type of authority that Saturn begets is not often authority without root. Like it's earned authority through a lot of practice and mastery. I think I've heard of maybe more so Mars in Pisces, but I kind of see this for Saturn in Pisces too as like martial arts. This is like the black belt, like the person who has spent years mastering the movements and the way that the environment and the individual are in a constant cycle of like call and response to each other. And being responsible is the ability to respond. So I think it's really important that we also talk about like what kind of water are we talking about when we're talking about Pisces? Because I see so many different ways that we can perceive that. And I think one of the things that I notice about Pisces is everybody's experience of Piscean water is different. It's like everybody having a different kind of eyesight, or like the subjectivity of perception is really palpable, because I personally associate Pisces with the ocean, but then within the ocean, there's so many different ecosystems and so many different, temperatures. There's still water, there's like really feisty tides, there's vortexes, there's glaciers, there's like tropical climates. And so it's really vast. And I think it's both having the authority to take up space, but also like choosing the world in which you want to take up space and choosing your audience and like speaking to an audience that feels aligned to you and that you are able to respond to, and really like beginning to carve out, or maybe not carve out, but like build those channels, like Saturn as a god of irrigation, and like building a channel between oneself and one's community or audience or people that we want to be in connection with.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. And I feel like something you were bringing up here, Erin, is thinking about like what kind of water is maybe most nutritive, right, for you to be swimming in, and also what kind of water can you most effortlessly contribute to. There's I love that. You know, it's interesting because I was just talking about this with a client earlier about this idea of, for a lot of people, maybe wanting to share their gifts or wanting to share their thoughts and perspectives with the world. One of the things that can be really challenging is fear of being, fear of being ostracized, or kind of almost being like having your colleagues look at you in a way that is judgmental or something like that. And I was talking to this person, and I was finding myself kind of getting down this exploration of like who this person thinks their audience is, and like who they think essentially their gifts are for, and that, there are times when maybe our gifts are for people that we deem as colleagues, but there are also times when that's not the truth. When we are supposed to serve people who are maybe, that sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it can take up like this fear of people that are around us who know what we're doing, who disqualifies what we're saying or our message or our perspective, can come from lack of clarity around who it is that we are serving in that moment. Mm-hmm.
It's like being in a sea of professionals,
Yeah.
a sea of colleagues, a sea of Saturnians that are like, are you competent? Like,
I think it's also bringing up this, like, the double-bodied, more so with Capricorn and Sagittarius, but like Capricorn as the sea goat ruled by Saturn, and Sagittarius as the centaur. I guess Pisces is double-bodied in that it's like two fish. But I was thinking a lot about amphibians, like the type of creature that lives both on earth and on water, or in water, because Saturn is like, as the sea goat, Enki, the Mesopotamian god that preceded Saturn, was the antelope of the deep waters, the god that lived in the waters of the deep unconscious. But Saturn in Greek mythology is primarily chthonic and bound to the earth. And so there is something about almost like this, like a double world, like the two fish. And so if we take the type of world that we know on earth and we translate it to water, what does that look like? So like a redwood forest becomes a kelp forest. Like a wall or a bridge becomes like a coral reef, which are known to be like really ancient and old, which is very Saturnian. I was also looking at oyster reefs, which I think is really interesting because oysters are known, they're bottom feeders, and they like eat bacteria and clean the water. And when they build up in a certain place, they build like a reef close to shore, but it actually becomes like a protection barrier for other sea creatures that live around that area or like to the shore. And so thinking about like the ways that our water gets cleaned, and the ways that water is protected, like Saturn as a barrier or a boundary or a limit of protection. I think I just went on like 3 tangents and very Piscean.
I love that. It's very evocative, though, to be thinking about, the amphibians and kind of the parallel. It's kind of making me think of that TV show. What is it called? Stranger Things, where like the normal world and like the upside down. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think like if we're talking about like judgment and mirroring and like just coming back to this idea of like fear of what our colleagues will think of us, there is something about like, I don't know if you've all noticed this, but I think astrology has gotten big enough, has become like a big enough ocean in this time period where people aren't just astrologers anymore. Like everyone has like a niche subject that they're nurturing and growing. And we're all sort of, I don't know about you, but I've had sessions with so many colleagues in the last couple of years because they're creating something really special and unique, and I want to learn from them. And so on one hand, we might be fearing the judgment. And then on the other hand, if we're really like dedicated to the craft and the creation that we're nurturing, there's a lot of reward, like possibility for reward there, which is very like Saturn, Jupiter, like the potential of like Jupiter's oceans, and then the reward that comes with the hard work that Saturn puts in.
I want to speak to that too, because I think it's in Hellenistic astrology that Jupiter has an association with like the good person. And I think about relationships with colleagues or like professional relationships, and like good spiritedness or friendship, or, you know, Pisces is a very like loving sign in a lot of ways, and how a lot of colleague relationships can start out like distant in a sense, where you don't talk to each other, you're aware of each other's existence. And the first reaching out of like, I like your work, or like commenting on something in a friendly way, the other person is like, wow, that's so great to hear from you. Like, I love your work. And there's this friendliness that opens up after like an apparent coldness. And that the entry ticket into that, you know, is simply just doing one's work and coming from a loving place. I think that the immediate, you know, coldness or perceived coldness is just that relationship hasn't been established, but that doesn't mean that there is actual animosity. It is, however, when you enter a professional space and you make your marketing tactic tearing other people down to prop yourself up, that you may create enemies, right? And so if someone wants to go about it that way and like have that type of marketing model, I think, you know, I don't prefer it. I feel like they lose a lot. And it's just a kind of paradigm, I think, that a lot of us have been, you know, taught in terms of like competitive marketing and whatnot. But when I see like a community like of astrologers, we can be friends, you know. I think different work environments might have more, say, like competition or toxicity or things to navigate more so than others. But to whatever degree one can bring in that kind of good person energy of Jupiter. It also reminds me too of something Adam Ellenboss posted a while ago. It was some series of infographics about how to create better karma. But I think it had certain things about like not being so judgmental, for example, or like different ways to not create enemies. And that just seems like something that comes to mind with Saturn and Pisces, of navigating the sea of like karma and cause and effect. It's like, how do you want to participate in a way where you actually create love and expansion and connection and community, and like kind of those Jupiterian topics, as opposed to muddying the waters where you swim. That's not even really an expression, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. It reminds me of something that Diana posted to Twitter the other day, Diana Rose Harper, for those listening, about like the difference between like, why is she so like blank, in like a judgy way, versus like, I wonder why she's so blank. And like the tone, like the vocal prosody is different when we come from a place of curiosity. And it's also a lot of work to rewrite those patterns if we've come into a pattern of being judgmental. And I think Jupiter, like Jupiterian process or Jupiterian space, can really span the spectrum of judgy to like judgy and sort of like higher than thou, to like extreme compassion and empathy. And I do think that Pisces, as opposed to Sagittarius, is less higher than thou. It's less lofty, and more like prone to empathy. The one way that I can see that being potentially a struggle with Saturn is the compare and despair like narrative. So when we're looking at someone else and then seeing how great their work is and then despairing that we're not there, and then it, without thinking about it, suddenly are criticizing or like projecting unwanted traits onto them, as opposed to recognizing like jealousy, which I think is a very Venusian trait, actually, jealousy, and Pisces being the exaltation, the sign of Venus's exaltation. Like seeing jealousy as a signal that there's something that we desire and can cultivate for ourselves. When we experience someone else as having something that we want, it can also be like a light, like a blinking light that sort of directs us towards what we need to be doing on our end and sort of staying on our side of the street, if you will.
Yeah. It's also kind of making me think about going back to what you were saying earlier, Erin, about the amphibians. How when we think about this in the context of an ocean ecosystem, it's much easier to see that we all contribute to the water, right? Like we all emit something. If we think of ourselves as ocean creatures, we all emit something that then gets fed or gets consumed or gets taken in by some other creature, and vice versa, right? Where sometimes we forget that as humans, we also have these porous boundaries, and whatever we put into the collective well is whatever we receive, which is part of why, I mean, personally for me, it never really resonates to talk about the ills of social media as being an inherent feature of, the social media is inherently evil, because it's like, your algorithm is literally reflecting back to you your consumption patterns, and it's like, I'm sure there are other, perhaps slightly more malicious intent, from like big corporations and things like that. But I think also not immediately taking away the fact that we also have some sort of creative agency within that is something that I kind of think about too, with regards to, relationships with other people in our community.
That image just kind of had me thinking too about the type of fish that maybe feed off of like waste or like anything in the ocean that filters the water. And I think about the process of like, when I'm really seeking to become more positive in my mindset or more loving, that there is a filtration or a detoxification process also in the ways that I'm like working through the gunk or like the material, and how the ecosystem model of it, and thinking of fish that particularly do that also just had me thinking of that at a personal level, but also like people who have that kind of quality, who are like talking things out with people or like helping clear the water through the service and the work that they're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about Saturn as associated with death and the scythe, and like cutting things away, but also death as compost, and like turning buildup into something more nutritive. The other thing that I'm thinking about, it's like more than slightly more romantic, is Venice. And this city that's like built on a series of like water channels, and how slow moving it must be to navigate. I've never been there, but to navigate around the city with boats and canoes, or I don't know what they are called, but I'm thinking about the reducing quality of Saturn and like keeping things simple, or reducing our lives down to like more quotidian, to better enjoy or romanticize the quotidian, and how some of the ways that we do that is rein in the mental chatter about what somebody's actions mean, or to like cut through and have that conversation early on so that you're not caught up in the gunk later on. And this phrase of like, keep it simple. And the relationship between simplicity and the dream, and how often I'm like, okay, so for example, I live in this like really sweet 1-bedroom that we rent from a friend by the beach, but I'm like constantly looking at potential homes somewhere else. And it's everybody's getting to know like this weird quirk of mine right now. I have Venus in the 4th house, but but like sometimes when I'm procrastinating, I'll be looking at homes and like dreaming about another home. And then I have this experience where if I've done that for like even 20 minutes, and then I come out of the screen and I remember where I am, and I can like sink into the beauty and the simplicity and the magic of where I am, that like jumping into this other realm almost felt like a waste of time. And so like coming back to this space of reality as a space that it's ripe for the magic of a dreamy reality, if we're willing to like step in and participate and create it in the way that Jonathan was talking about Jupiter as participation.
Yeah. This is what's coming up for me, and I'm curious if the two of you would like to explore this. But something I was also thinking about with Pisces, Saturn in Pisces, is that there seems to me to be an opportunity to really start recovering or reclaiming our connection to a sense of like spiritual ancestry, but also the kind of complication that can come from that, right? Like I feel like when I think about Saturn being about lineage and Pisces being about, the spiritual realm, right? Or like the quantum field, like it's kind of making me think about how connecting to some sort of spiritual lineage is both empowering and a fraught activity, or can be fraught because it can bring up a lot. It can bring up judgment. It can bring up comparison, on top of also grounding us in a sense of time and place and connection, right? And I know that both of you also work with, you have been devoted to evolutionary astrology for a while, Sabrina, and you have been really working with Hellenistic astrology for some time too, Erin. And I know that there's always overlap, right, in that, but also this sense of lineage and how we place ourselves, and kind of maybe, I guess what I'm really trying to say is like, how do we have right relationship with that sense of lineage, right, and with that sense of connection that we have with people who have been exploring these topics that are deeply important to us in a deep way, and how to kind of maybe, think of where we are in the family of spiritual lineages that we find ourselves in.
I'll pass it to you, Sabrina.
Yeah, that's a deep question. It has me thinking about like Pisces is pretty inclusive. Like Pisces can include everything, and certain belief systems are not inclusive. Like they're very particular or very specific. And evolutionary astrology, like for me, part of what keeps me devoted to it is this devotion I have to transmitting it and sharing it with others. I think on my own, evolutionary astrology already gave me all these pathways to things to explore. There's something about the way it's structured the way, like the wisdom teachings of it that create pretty much infinite space for a lot of things to exist. Except, I think there can be places where things can't intersect. Like the example, that I came by is like encountering these like Mormon missionaries who I had a great time talking to, by the way. But like they had this belief, part of their belief system was that if I don't convert in this lifetime, that in purgatory, I can read the Book of Mormon and convert, that I have that chance. Whereas in evolutionary astrology, part of the cosmology is that we reincarnate over and over again until we exhaust all separating desires and we merge back with source. And so I could also see them through my lens that these missionaries will keep being religious until they exhaust that desire and they evolve into some other kind of spirituality and so on. Or what if the universe has that much creative power that there really are multiple universes and afterlives, that maybe the Christian afterlife exists because the universe is that infinitely creative. And so the more I started thinking about this, there's some way that I orient to reality where it's like one ocean, many shores. That concept, I think, coined by Jorge Ferrer, where the universe is that expansive that all these different things can exist. And then the question becomes maybe the impact of these beliefs or practices, and navigating kind of like, it has me thinking of my friend Archetype, also an astrologer, and they speak of allyship as like, can you simultaneously be really, really devoted to the rainforests and the creatures, and then also be participating in like consuming things that are extracting and killing the rainforest? It's like if we're holding that level of, cosmological conflict within, that's where I think it becomes difficult to be navigating all these different spiritual practices. And so I think about like, if I do things that my ancestors did and I just tap into like Jewish holidays or something, like, to me, that doesn't take away from my other spiritual practices. It just is like Saturnian or root chakra, like there's a reverence that I can find there. And so I think it could be a matter of like seeing how different practices can coexist. But if there is something that really just doesn't collaborate with the rest of the system, that might be where there's conflict.
Yeah,
Did
that's
that make
beautiful.
sense? I don't know if I...
Yeah, I think so. I'm curious to hear what's coming up for you, Erin, about that.
Yeah, it made sense to me, Sabrina. And I think like holding that tension, like I think Pisces is actually especially skilled at holding conflicting values, possibilities, potentials, and realities. And sometimes to a fault. Like I think Pisces is uniquely capable of contributing to like the destruction of the rainforest, and then also holding a value of wanting to protect and conserve it. And I think this is where we do get into some of the shadow of Saturn and Pisces, where there can be like a tendency to allow like an out of focus, like a blurry perspective, or like an inability to engage the contradictions in a tangible enough way. And I think like on one end, there's the good enough, like the Jupiterian space is like, oh, it's good enough. Like it can be a little bit careless. And so I think what Saturn usually brings for us is the care and the care to make a structure that's very refined and very specific and very like on point and has sharp edges, and like the importance of clear boundaries. And I think the boundaries do get less clear with Saturn and Pisces. And I think that it's a really ripe space for us to be negotiating boundaries. And I imagine there will be a lot of like negotiating. And so I think in terms of lineage, like negotiating with our lineages, like, and making a choice about what we want to incorporate and what we want to let like dissolve or float away or, not be absorbed. Like I think about Pisces as a very absorbent sign. And I loved what you said about it being really inclusive, Sabrina. I think also if we look at one of the myths of Pisces, around the fall of the Titans and the rise of the Olympians, like in the middle of that war when the Titans were losing power and they created this like huge monster that kind of tore apart the world and went after Aphrodite and Eros, and Aphrodite and Eros turned themselves into fish and escaped into the river, together, like tied by a cord. I think there is both the chaos, like the chaos demon, and the like the devotional love that we see in Pisces, and the willingness to step away from that which is maybe not necessarily beyond repair, but like in the moment, we're not able to engage the fight, or we don't have the capacity or the skill set that's necessary to fight for something. And I think that can be useful in terms of taking care of ourselves, and also sometimes really difficult, if like on a collective level, if we stop efforting for systemic change that we need to see. It reminds me of Joanna Macy's work, who I reference to a lot of my clients. She wrote a book called Active Hope, and it's about how to stay with the trouble of advocating and acting, like orienting activism towards bettering our earth and our climate, like in the face of climate change and global warming, without falling into the pits of despair. And she talks about a few different ways that we can navigate that. And one of the ways that she talks about is thinking about your life as like a hero's journey. And in those moments when you feel this deep despair, choosing to remember that every hero's journey has a moment of deep despair, and the hero has to actually move through that moment in order to get to the other side and create something better than when they started the journey. Like they follow through on the quest. And I think that speaks to Saturn's like qualities of endurance. But there's also like devotion, I think, is a really strong Saturnian theme. And for me, I don't just think about my like biological ancestors when I'm thinking about lineage. I think about I guess I also think about the biological ancestors that are other than human, like literally the earth, and how we're all like descended from like cells of other creatures that are like, hundreds of thousands of years old. And earth as like the first ancestor. And so if I'm devoted to my lineage, like that's a place where I can step into the spirituality of Saturn and Pisces. And I think it's a more Eastern perspective, like a more Eastern cosmology. I think there are like Buddhism and Hinduism and I'm sure many other lineages from the East that are oriented towards this idea of like oneness. Yeah, I feel like I have so much more that I could say, but I've been talking for a minute, so I'm going to pause there.
Yeah. This is making me think about how in my own life, often like my own sense of like defensiveness around spiritual lineage, or like sometimes even offensiveness towards spiritual lineage, which is probably more common in my case, thinking about, oh, maybe the religion that I was brought up in, often comes from not having had enough space created intentionally for mystery. And that, I think of Saturn and Pisces as also maybe the spiritual discipline to make space for that mystery and to allow that mystery to be the source from which grace flows, and there's something I think really powerful to not feeling like I have to necessarily get into like a debate about, my spiritual experiences, but that in me creating more space for mystery, I can get more curious when other people are in that space of being defensive, or sometimes even actively attacking my beliefs, and yeah, just kind of being in that space of like, oh yeah, I'm really curious about why you think that, and going there with people. I've also been thinking about this in regards to just holding space for people in general, because sometimes, I had this experience where my partner essentially arrived at a question for an answer that he's been struggling with for the past month. And the way that he arrived at that answer is literally just his own process of continually chasing his own tail until he got to the answer, And I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be people who are, essentially whose work is to, walk each other home, right? Like, when someone is spinning like a top, right, trying to find their own answers, there are many things I can do. I can reach my hand and then get hurt in the process, right? I can try to stop it, or I can spin them even faster, or I can spin alongside them, right? And I've been thinking about like, what does it mean to have flexibility, thinking about Pisces as the mutable sign also, in being able to know which response is generative for a particular situation. And sometimes you don't know. And sometimes this is one of those areas where I think that giving myself personally a lot of space to fuck it up has been really helpful, and has been a site of then it feels like a site of exploration rather than like inspiring a certain sense of duty that I get trapped in.
I love this thread, Jonathan. Also, like the ways that we hold space for others being like attached to our like to the survival of the relationship or the health of the relationship, of like being able to integrate someone else's spin and not be like knocked off our own feet by it, or not succumb to the spin. And I think that is actually like a pretty strong skill of Saturn and Pisces, of like listening to someone else have their moment and their process without getting caught up in like the whirlpool of it. And it reminds me of, in preparation for this episode, and also just because I was interested, I did a bunch of research on like sea creatures, like like what are the oldest creatures of the sea. And I think this is connected to the mystery aspect that you're speaking to. And one of the creatures that I came across is glass sponges, which are most commonly found in the really deep ocean, and they're firmly attached to the seafloor, with few exceptions, for their entire adult lives. And the way that they're literally a sponge, but they're called glass sponges, which I think is really interesting. And they do have this sort of translucent quality. And they survive by pumping water through their bodies and extract very small food particles and dissolved substances, which reminds me of what Sabrina was talking about in terms of like eating like bacteria or like the gunk from the ocean. And the reefs were thought to have become extinct 40 million years ago. But in 1987, scientists discovered a 9,000-year-old living glass sponge reefs in Canada. But I think that there is something about like the moving water and the moving emotions and Saturn in Pisces being just like chilling there on the floor, like on the ocean floor, just letting whatever it is pass through it, like absorbing it, integrating whatever nutrients it can, and then like letting the rest move on.
Yeah.
But staying where it is and not like the endurance and the age and the wisdom of not getting swept up in someone else's emotional field, I think is a really strong thread of Saturn in Pisces.
I really appreciate that. I feel too like part of Pisces is getting caught up in these various whirlpools and being on the waves, but Saturn, you know, as an archetype has so much more boundary or kind of like withdrawn qualities. And to combine Saturn and Pisces, it would be like that capacity to do that relationally and also personally, because there are many waves that we can experience and simultaneously like have one foot in the wave, like one foot in the humanness of it, but also not fully buy into it, such as moments where we're extremely dysregulated and then coming up with stories to describe it when, you know, that may be an intoxicant of the moment. But to be able to have that sturdiness inside to navigate those waters makes a lot of sense with Saturn and Pisces.
Yeah, I think I'm also thinking about Saturn as being associated with the god Pan, which loves all beings. And so bringing like the love of all beings and the acceptance and the willingness to sacrifice for all beings into Jupiter's realm, which is also like filled with a lot of compassion and empathy, feels really connected to that thread as well.
I love this conversation so much. I want to quickly touch base and see if we want to talk a little bit about the transit or just kind of, you know, on a large macro level. I feel like maybe you can lead a little bit here, Erin. I'm curious to see and to hear, you know, what transits feel significant to you. And maybe, you know, as we mentioned in the beginning, this transit's, you know, from like March 2023 to like about February 2026. And so it's kind of a, you know, not a huge swath of time, but it's significant, you know, that those 3 years. So specifically, I think you had brought up before we started recording the connection between Saturn and the outer planets. And yeah, I'm curious to explore whatever's kind of jumping at you here.
I think the biggest one, thanks for that invitation. I think the biggest one that is coming up for me is Saturn's bi-sign sextile with Uranus, which will perfect, I think, in 2025. And that feels particularly pertinent because of Saturn's recent square with Uranus, when Saturn was in domicile in Aquarius, squaring Uranus in Taurus. And it really feels like a continuation of this story, specifically of the Uranus story. And I think with Uranus and Taurus, we've seen a lot connected to decentralized wealth. And I know people have talked about like Bitcoin and blockchain. And of course, there are other significations of Uranus and Taurus, but I think the square with Saturn, we saw a lot of, it almost felt like the rise and fall of Bitcoin that I noticed happening in that time. And I think the concept of decentralized wealth really speaks to me. And I think the physical manifestation of it up to this point has lacked the certain value. It's lacked alignment with some of the values that I want to see actually blooming in that space. But we all know that our financial system is shit. Shite. Can I swear in your podcast?
Of course. Okay?
Yeah. And I think the Saturn-Uranus squares showed us a lot of the ways that the financial system, the current financial system, blocked the potentially new financial system or system of wealth from like coming into being, or at least coming into being in ways that I think are more positive and more like aligned with like redistributing and not having quite so much centralized in certain places. And I think Saturn moving into Pisces really signifies that transition from, this is why this can't work. These are all of the blocks. This is the current system as we know it, and it's been around for a long time, and it's working in some ways, but not in others. And then there were all of the like protests around like identity hierarchies and class hierarchies. And Saturn moving into Pisces, I think, moves us into the realm of potential, like dreaming up potential structures that do support more decentralization. And so I'm interested in what happens with blockchain and with like access to resources and access to sharing resources. And I'm hoping that it doesn't get totally co-opted by big banks who are like, funneling and pouring money into like in messed up ways and like hoarding it and moving it around. I totally see that swirl happening as well. But I do think that there is maybe some actual structure and laws and regulations that get brought to that space to create more open channels for for resource sharing. Like that's a big one that comes up for me with the Saturn-Uranus square. I'd love to know what Sabrina's been thinking about too. Or Saturn-Uranus sextile, sorry.
Well, I think about the sextile between Taurus and Pisces, and to me, they both have like a dreamy, idealistic, aesthetic connection. Like Uranus and Taurus, I've connected it a lot to like embodiment and bringing that spark of, that higher self or awakened energy within into our material existence and just like our basic day-to-day reality. And Saturn in Pisces is like that structured or applied dreaming. So the sextile feels supportive for building and creating dreams. Like it feels less, the Saturn in Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus felt like so much more of a clash. And I think just there was a lot around even like resource shortages or, these kind of like limitations with Saturn. And so I wonder if the sextile will simply be more gentle or maybe something coming forth from the mystery. Like I think Saturn in Aquarius, while Saturn in Aquarius can dream, I just feel like that clash, the square had so much more of like a no, or like here's an impasse, or like stop and start. And the sextile feels like maybe something blooming or like something in the garden that comes from the mystery. So it feels gentler. I'm not sure how to think about it in terms of big financial systems, but in terms of like personal life or personal psychology, I think there's something about being value oriented with Taurus and then having the inspired visionary kind of Pisces consciousness. And when we can get those in harmony, it's like we can really build a dream with a kind of coherence to it. So that's what comes to mind.
Yeah. It's interesting. This conversation is kind of making me think. I mean, as you were speaking, Erin, I was kind of racking up my brain around like what was happening to me personally when Saturn and Uranus was square, specifically around like in 2021. And something I remember being someone who has like a day corporate job is this constant push and pull between like corporations or companies wanting people to go back into the office and then like realizing that, oh, we really kind of can't do that because of all these other reasons. And this, kind of step forward and then like a couple steps backwards kind of situation kept happening. And then you can also feel there's a lot of conversations around pleasure activism and like nap ministry, like just kind of, we all need more rest, which I totally agree. And also I think there is a reality of Saturn in Aquarius where maybe the system hasn't gotten or evolved to the point where we can really support that yet. So then there is kind of this clash between like the ideals and how we kind of put that into practice. Like I'm really thinking about, I think it's very fascinating that there's a movement, especially during the Saturn-Uranus square, where a lot of people started their own business and then on a value level, really centering this idea of rest and pleasure, but then also on a very like behind the scenes having to really hustle, to get their business off the ground, right? And so there's a bit of, I was kind of noticing that there's a, not exactly cacophony, but there's a dissonance in the energy of like the message that's being shared and like the energy that's behind it, or like the energy that this person is inhabiting while they're sharing the message. So I think when I think about Saturn sextiling Uranus, I'm also thinking about what are the ways that, perhaps there's also an invitation here for a dissolving of some sort, that perhaps the boundary is no longer so strict or so stringent between like what it means to be in that workspace and in that play space, maybe on an individual level. And then I'm also thinking about, for example, I'm probably speaking out of my expertise here, but I have friends who are in the NFT world. And I remember when NFT was first kind of coming out, there was a lot of talk about how this is going to be really great for artists. And I don't really see that storyline kind of continuing. So on a mundane level, I guess I'm curious to see where that's gonna go, because it doesn't feel like to me the story is completely dead. It's just kind of like being stalled right now or something like that.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, where like so many of the stories got stalled.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from listening to both of you talk and hearing, Sabrina, how you're translating the macro into the like micro personal is reminding me of how when somebody offers us an invitation, perhaps, and we say no and we just orient around the problem and why we have a no, as opposed to experiencing the invitation and where the yes might be, or where the nuance around a no might be, feels like the shift from Saturn in Aquarius, or Saturn in a Saturn ruled sign, or a no ruled sign, or a block oriented sign, to Saturn in like potential land. And it feels like the difference in the way that we're using our language, and also like writing our brain patterns to be more like solution focused. And I think solution is actually a really good word for Pisces, or a water sign, where we're like talking about like dissolving or like creating a solution, so that multiple needs can get met, and like activating the conscious aspect of a sextile, which does require our awareness and our effort. So I don't by any means think that it's going to be easy. Like anything involving Saturn is probably going to require some effort, but I think there's a lot of possibility for seeing the good in something and then following the thread of good, as opposed to seeing the bad in something and then letting the story end there. And I feel like Saturn's entrance into Pisces and the bi-sign sextile to Uranus, and eventually perfection of that sextile, helps us actually continue the story, but from a more solution-focused lens. Almost like the image that I'm getting is like a photographer with a camera on manual focus, and the subject of the photo keeps moving because it's Uranus, it moves very fast. And so the photographer is just like moving the lens and trying to focus and like trying to catch that perfect moment where the lens focuses on the subject and they're actually able to snap it. And it feels like doing that practice over and over again to the point where our abilities have kind of like an autofocus capacity, where we just do it automatically. We're focused on the solution as opposed to consistently seeing the barriers or the blocks or the limits.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth it for listeners to think about the areas of their life that Uranus has been uprooting since it's been in Taurus, and some of the fears or anxieties or scarcities and limits that came up as Saturn was transiting Aquarius, and the lessons that got learned that now get to be translated into action that is like a much more fertile soil, because we've moved into like warm and moist territory as opposed to cold and dry territory.
Yeah, I love that.
Like what happens when your resources are no longer limited?
Yeah, that's really juicy. I'm also thinking about how sextiles to me, and I think this maybe is something that we talked about, or when I was learning from your EA intensive, Sabrina, which is this idea of how sextile is about, or that sextile kind of is calling us to more consciously collaborate, or to more consciously kind of bring awareness, build a bridge between two forces that are not inherently oppositional or are not inherently in conflict with one another, but may need a little bit more extra prodding in order for them to kind of get to know one another, as opposed to trines, which are usually with, two signs that have the same element. And so there's already kind of a natural affinity to that.
Yeah, this is like opening up a lot for me. I feel what Erin was saying about where things were just like a no, or like it being the end of the story. And it has me thinking about Saturn and Aquarius and like almost a kind of freeze, or like I can't or we can't response to the impasse. And thinking about the collaboration or the sextile with Uranus and Taurus and Saturn and Pisces, opening up some more creativity around those solutions. Again, that word too that Erin was sharing. And there's something about like flexibility with the mutable sign, as well as like the dreaminess of Pisces, because I felt this actually really alive just, at the time that we're recording this, Mercury and Pluto are conjunct in Capricorn. And I was feeling like when someone's like, I don't want to talk about this, and the kind of record skip awkwardness that happens where it's not easy to just be like, okay, let's change the subject because now everything's intense and inflamed of like, this is a no-go, you know, and how these issues that we've been having, however they've shown up personally with the Saturn Uranus square, where there was a little bit more tension and freeze, where we might be accessing some more solutions that allow things to feel smoother and for there to feel like there's less of that like stop and go energy.
It's interesting. I'm thinking, I listened to well, I didn't listen to the whole thing, Sabrina, but I listened to you and Drew Levanti on Justin's podcast, Nectar of the Heart, talking about Saturn and Pisces. And somebody had mentioned Saturn entering Aquarius and social distancing and how that came up like pretty quickly. And one of the things that I'm thinking about related to like the freeze response of Saturn Uranus, so much of my work in the last couple of years has become about attachment theory and astrology. And Carmen Spagnola, who I work with, teaches a lot about attachment and the ways that you can earn secure attachment. And most of what you can do is contact nutrition. Like that's the term for it. And so I'm thinking about like social distance translating to contact nutrition and like what happens when the boundaries themselves get dissolved or Saturn moves into a space where there's less boundaries and is suddenly making contact. Yeah. And the nutritious quality of Saturn and Jupiter together, creating like more balance and more stability, and also like the fertility that comes with Uranus and a Venus ruled sign, but also Venus getting its exaltation in Pisces. And one of the things that I was thinking about as like as an archetype, actually, I'm going to pause on that because I think contact nutrition is an interesting place to land.
Yeah, this is kind of making me think, and I'm not sure how related this is going to be, Erin, because I'm just kind of following a little thread that I'm seeing here, which is that, you know, going back to what you were saying, Sabrina, about the connection between Pisces and Taurus. I am a Pisces sun and I have quite a lot of Taurus friends. And I found that just kind of in one-on-one relationships where there's harmony is that Pisces is always able to tap into like almost like a random dissociative impulse or like to follow. Like I find myself even thinking about my Mercury in Pisces, just throwing out something kind of random, but that helps, you know, the Taurian stuckness to kind of get a little bit jarred, you know, or like in a space of being a little like, what is going on? What is reality anymore? And then in that process of being dissociated from a certain kind of stuckness that I think Taurus can get really stuck in, and maybe Aquarius too, actually, that there's something regenerative from that space of randomness or that space of like fluidity. It provides like the absurdity of Pisces, I think, can provide a lubricant for the fixed signs.
Oh my God, lube is such a good, such a good, thought. I'll leave it there.
So I'm curious if maybe as we are wrapping up, as we're kind of slowing down here, is there anything else that either of you would like to explore or like leave people with, you know, with regards to just considering Saturn's transit in Pisces? Any final thing that wants to bubble forward?
I have two things. One of them is I had mentioned contact nutrition, and I just want to name what the 5 elements of contact nutrition are in case people want to engage them as tools that you can use to start to establish like a sense of safety in your body and like co-regulate with other folks. and they're kind eyes, vocal prosody. So like more like it's different if I'm like, hey there, or hello there, or like sort of entering somebody into a meditative, more calming tone. So kind eyes, vocal prosody, shared rhythm, ingestion behaviors, and physical touch. And those 5 forms of contact nutrition can help someone calm down or co-regulate in a space of activation if 2 people or more than 2 people are willing to engage those. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about is the hardness of Saturn and the mass potential of Pisces and this almost fractal quality that we get with the multiplicity and the cadence and the mutability of Pisces. And so I've been thinking about diamonds as this like rare and precious piece of earth that also sometimes gets passed down. And like certainly the diamond industry is like really fucked up. So I mean, I'm not suggesting that people go out and buy diamonds, but I am thinking about the enduring quality and the beauty of diamonds and the way that they glitter and cause the light to go in all kinds of ways, and how nothing can scratch them. And because they're so hard, I think only a diamond can cut a diamond. And so that feels very Saturn and Pisces to me.
Thank you, Erin.
I'm thinking about either like turning up a dream or sobriety. And by this, like, there's a way of sobering oneself from excessive fantasy, like, and I'm thinking too of what you shared, Erin, about like looking at homes versus dropping into the magic of the one that you're in, and how sometimes fantasy has a dissociative quality or can take us away from being in the magic of the present. And like for people to kind of tap into their intuition of what would be more nutritious, of like coming down to earth and sobering and finding the magic in what already is. Or if you want to turn up the fantasy or vision and have that kind of daydream of like what you want your next 5 years to look like, or what you want your next evolution to be, and being in that visioning and then applying and like building from that vision, or bringing that frequency into being. And that neither one is necessarily like objectively better or true to do, but it's really personal to where people are at in terms of if you need to come down to earth or like go fly a little bit more. And maybe it's happening in different areas of life. But I'm really thinking about this. Like sometimes I miss the dreamer energy that I had in my early 20s, but I also didn't have that much established. But it was so fun to dream. It was being on that hero's journey, and I'm like in this space where I don't know what my next dream is exactly. And I'm like not trying to force it or just come up with a goal to have something, but I'm like really tending to that prayer of like, what's my next dream, basically. And maybe that, I'm inviting other people into that with me, or into the process of coming down to earth if you want to find the magic in what already exists.
Wow. I love that phrase, tending the prayer. That feels also very Saturn and Pisces.
Definitely. Like the mantra is very beautiful. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Jonathan.
You both. I just love this conversation so much. How can people find your work?
So I have Magic of the Spheres podcast, monarchastrology.com, and I'm on Instagram at Sabrina Monarch, and on Twitter at Sabrina_Monarch.
Amazing. How about you, Erin?
I am E.T. Shipley ship like a boat, LEY.com. And you can mostly find me on my website. If it's your first time visiting my website, you'll probably get a pop-up to sign up for my newsletter. And that's my most reliable way to connect. I'm also on Instagram at @ET_Shipley and on Twitter at @ET_Shipley. I am way more present on Instagram than on Twitter. And just want to make a plug. Sabrina mentions this a lot too, that there's a lot of scammers out there. That's my only handle. I'm pretty sure the ones that she offered are the only handles that she has as well. So if you see any extra letters or numbers or underscores or spaces, it's probably not us.
Always a good reminder for especially Saturn and Pisces. Yeah. Thank you both. This has been such a delight.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
All right, that is it for my conversation with Sabrina and Erin. I'm so grateful that you are here. I hope that you found something helpful. I hope that that conversation helped you cultivate a deeper understanding of Saturn and Pisces, and to maybe dilate your perspective or your consciousness around what this transit may bring you and some of the lessons that may be waiting for you. If you have been enjoying this podcast, I highly recommend that you check out Erin and Sabrina's work. All of the links will be down below. And yeah, I would also love it if you could rate and review the podcast. I know that all podcasters say that, but truly this is really helpful for getting the podcast out there. If you are on Apple Podcast, feel free to leave a review. It doesn't have to be long. 4 or 5 sentences, definitely enough. And yeah, I can't wait to see you again until the next time you tune into this podcast. And I wish you a beautiful week, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you so much for listening.